Radio Cairo, FM 95.4. The Voice of Egypt.
It's exactly 4 in Cairo. It's now time for World of Info. Hello everybody and welcome. This is World of Info and we will start right away with Dr. Mohammed at the controls, Dr. Amir Mabrouk, Professor of Plastic Surgery at Ain Shams University. I'm Najla NAGIB and we're with you until 5 o'clock, so stay with us. This is World of Info. Yes, back again. This is Word of Info. Good afternoon, and we are having today a very special program with our two distinguished ambassadors, His Excellency Ambassador Stéphane Ramate, Ambassador of France in Egypt, and His Excellency Ambassador Julius George Loy, Ambassador of Germany in Egypt. Welcome.
It's a great pleasure and honor to have such a chance to have both distinguished ambassadors who served their countries in different countries all over the world and served in the diplomatic foreign services of their country, and both of them agreed to come in our program to show how fraternal is the relations between Germany and France nowadays, a relation that has seen a lot of fraternity in the early medieval period, and even before the medieval period they were belonging to the same empire of Charlemagne, and then a lot of water has passed under the bridge and a lot of enmity has started. But from the 1945 onwards, we have seen change of this from just normal neighborhood to friendship and then to fraternity, with the famous agreement between Konrad Adenauer, the Chancellor of Germany, and President Charles de Gaulle. And we are celebrating here this fraternal relations, which almost 55 years today, or fraternal relations. And with the two distinguished ambassadors, Ambassador Ramate has served as ambassador in Australia, and he's a political science by education, and Ambassador Louis from Germany, who studied law and served as environmental and political ambassador at large and ambassador in other countries, and now a distinguished ambassador in Cairo, presenting and carrying not only the flags of their countries but the flag of Europe, the European Union. A speech done yesterday by President Macron of France, talking about how it is very important to keep the unity of the whole of Europe, not only on the pillars of borders, but on the pillars of education, on the pillars of health, on the pillars of environment protection, on the pillars of economy, on the pillars that will make such a union sound strong. And no wonder that both countries are forming the greatest populous countries of Europe, and countries that has accepted immigrants from all over the world, and both countries now are doing this role of protecting Europe. Sirs and Excellencies, really we're very proud and we're very happy that you are coming both to us. We are going to start our questions by one question to one ambassador, and then the other ambassador can be kind enough to make the same comment. And definitely I think our listeners today will grasp a lot of information about France and Germany, that not just the trilateral relations between our countries, but also the bilateral and the strengths of the trilateral. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The 19th century onwards has witnessed the start of the three grand periods of relations between the two countries. The hereditary enmity that started from 1871 till 1945. It was a very bitter period, Your Excellency. And the famous question, was it inevitable? Was all these wars necessary to reach friendship?
Well,
We'll
first,
start with our French ambassador, please.
thank you, Amr. First, it's a great pleasure to be this afternoon with you to participate to your program, and of course to discuss with my good friend Georg. I think even if the radio was not existing 1 century ago, such a program would have been possible. To have together in the same room a French and a German ambassador talking of the state of the world, what we can do together, how we could cooperate. That was not possible. As you said, water, rivers, the flow of the time have passed. The Rhine is still a river, but it's no longer a border. It's between our two countries, I think, a symbol of what we can do together. We have those tragedies in common with Germany. 3 wars,
In a very short period, unfortunately.
Yes, in 70 years' time.
Yes, 1871, 1914,
Millions,
and 1939,
yes,
1940.
millions of dead people, destructions in Germany and in France, generations sacrificed. And of course, because of what you said, Amr, great leaders, they decided that we have to look to the future. And the future, this is something we have to build together, France and Germany together. For one simple reason, never again.
Yes.
Never again. And since now 70 years, France and Germany are side by side, hand into hand, together, to build Europe. And I think today we are closer than ever. We cooperate, and we will come back to that. We are completely integrated.
Yes.
The people are completely integrated. Of course, we can do better, but we'll come that later on. But today, what is completely reassuring for the new generations, any possibility of France and Germany diverging is absolutely impossible. This is something which is completely out of the mind of the people. We are together, two countries completely side by side.
Of course. Excellency, what do you think about that?
I totally agree. It is really depicts absolutely correctly and properly the way things developed. We had really quite different times, even before the first war you mentioned of 1870.
Oh, yes.
We had a great period where many people from France came to Germany, and Germans went to France. Frederick le Grand,
Yes.
Frederick the Great.
Yes.
He spoke much better French than he spoke German.
And strange enough, I mean, it was a war, animosity between governments, not between people. This is what was written in history books, that in the medieval period and even in the Renaissance period and the classical period, you can see governments having fight between each others, but still the people are having the same integration. How is it possible to pass into such animosity in just 70 years?
I think it was particularly the transformation of Europe, starting to unite Germany and really transforming the entire power structure in Europe, which is always a difficult thing to do. The very experienced diplomatic power of France,
Yes.
of Britain, but more far apart as well. But Germany, which so long was the accumulation of many small kingdoms and princedoms in what is Germany today and even beyond, this tried to unite itself, and it started really mainly with the Napoleonic Wars,
Yes.
which really brought up the idea
Militarization
of
and the idea of militarization.
Exactly.
Yes.
No, not militarization, but the idea of being German, which for a long time had been forgotten.
Yes.
And this came about then in in the war of 71 with very unfortunate, let's say, consequences and decisions from the German side, because it was led in a way which was not sustainable, which did not treat our partner France at that time as a partner in the future.
Exactly, yes.
We were neighbors, and the way it was done, the Bismarck
The conditions, the
decisions,
Bismarck
the conditions
decisions.
he did, Versailles and Alsace as well. These were things maybe Bismarck didn't fully support, but in the end he gave in to demands on the German side, which were not very far-sighted.
But
And
I mean,
this
even
led to a resentment, which then led to the first, in the end, to the First World War.
even with the removal of Bismarck in the early 1890s, still the other war was inevitable. I mean, you removed Bismarck effect, but you had William the Second. Do you think it was because of that?
Well, the diplomacy was definitely much better in the hands of Bismarck, but it was, let's say, constructed in a way which made Bismarck absolutely necessary. But he was a human
wasn't there
being.
anymore,
He
yes.
was a human being. He died. He was even before dismissed
he was
from
dismissed, yes,
Wilhelm
from
II.
office, yes.
And then German diplomacy was not, let's say, the best one. We didn't have the experience France acquired over
Yes.
centuries. And
Yes.
this really led to this unfortunate development, which then led to the First World War. Different from the Second World War, where things developed differently, because then
Yes.
it was something which really was construed and was cold-bloodedly, but in a crazy way, devised by Hitler.
Yes,
This
definitely.
attack, this aggression war, and this all the unspeakable atrocities which happened after.
Of course. We have to stop talking about this dark past, because the reconciliation that started in 1945 till 1963 was really a great step forward, because the French, the victorious French, France that came out of World War I was not that wise. Them and the Brits, and of course the United States, were not wise enough in the Versailles treaties and the treaties to follow, to build up a peaceful world, but it built a peaceful war beginnings that ended up with people like Hitler taking up the opportunity. So in 1945 it came out to the minds of a person with an open-minded, although he's a general and a man who suffered a lot and who was all education and all his life was a military career, like General Charles de Gaulle, and a man who came out from the civilian service by the name of Konrad Adenauer, a man who had the vision that no more for atrocities, no more place for war. A man really, I personally carry a lot of respect to him, Mr. Konrad Adenauer, who put on his shoulders, on his weak old shoulders, the brunt of the whole German people, the pride of the whole German people, and the will to say no more to war. Any concessions I could give, but I will not give up the concession of changing Germany into an agricultural country. Germany is an industrial country that has to live by the standards of industrial country, but I will have to calm all the fears of our neighbors. And Charles de Gaulle was very accepting of that. So speaking about this beautiful period, the start of the strong friendship that from 1945 to 1963 was able to reach the treaty. Tell us about that, Your Excellency, Ambassador of Germany, about that.
Well, it's something which started slowly, and I can, even from my own family, I can give an example. My mother, as a young student, she made a trip on the bicycle by herself to France. And there in 47, she met a French girl, and the friendship between the two lasted really throughout until their death.
Wow.
It is really impressive, and I, as a consequence, for example, as a 9 or 10-year-old boy, I was sent to Paris already for 4 weeks to this family, and we exchanged later on. Their daughter came to us, and this really continued a long time. So it was even early enough that really people themselves thought about how can we really continue. Was it the right way we did in the past? And this was impressive, but it needed, of course, the generosity and the magnanimity of General de Gaulle, who really thought about it as well. He thought about France and Germany, but he thought as well about Europe. And he made this big gesture towards the defeated Germany, really come back, we will want to continue peacefully with Germany and France even.
And of course you're being modest because on the other side there was such a grand person like Konrad Adenauer, a man which I always remember his famous photograph when he went to Moscow and to bring up the last of the prisoners of war. Yeah. And the lady who the mother of one of the prisoners of war kissing in his hand in appreciation, not in anything but appreciation and love, because he brought her son back. And I believe a man with such magnitude and such humble attitude can really make a difference in a country like Germany or in a relation like between Germany and France. What do you think, Your Excellency, Stefan, about this point, about this period of 1945-1963, which I believe was the best way to start this strong relationship?
You know, I will take Georg's point. We all have our personal story. We all in France and Germany belong to families which were absolutely, hit, affected by what happened between France and Germany. My grandparents, my grandfather, for example, fought during the First World War. My parents were young kids during the Second World War, and were, of course, very much affected, and their memories, they are still living, and their memories are very much, lively because of what happened during the Second World War. So our, the past generations, the two past generations, were absolutely impacted by what happened between France and Germany, the context of France and Germany. And now our generation, I was born in the 60s, we are this generation created, this new dynamics between France and Germany. But still having constantly in mind what happened to the generation of our parents and our grandparents. And the motto for us was, we have to build something, not to create, the past which still haunted our parents and our grandparents. And you're right, you mentioned Konrad Adenauer and de Gaulle, they were absolutely,
larger than life.
Yeah. But you have also to keep in mind, a famous photography, which I think sum up what exists between France and Germany nowadays. This is this famous photography of Helmut Kohl and François Mitterrand in Verdun. Probably the worst war field during
the worst war field.
30,000 dead, both sides, every single day. During 30,000 dead every single day during First World War, and Helmut Kohl and Mitterrand hand to hand in front of a coffin of an unknown soldier. This is, a symbol of what we are now able to create between France and Germany. So this photo has to be a constant reminder of our duty, what we have to do between France and Germany together. This, our generation, the generation of our children now, and even the generation of our grandchildren, because we are entering our 60s. And
you don't have to give this a mention, please.
So we have this duty. We have this duty of transmitting this Franco-German spirit to the new generation.
Definitely. I think we have to get out for a break, because this is very touchy and very emotional, because the third question deal with the 1963 agreement, which has carried the friendship to a higher place and more integration, which we have to give a lot of time for.
Yes. Back again, this is Word of Info, and we had His Excellency Ambassador Stéphane Rameté, Ambassador of France in Egypt, and Ambassador Julius Loy, Ambassador of Germany in Egypt, and we'll be with you after this break. So back again, listening to Winds of Change, and thanks to Hazem Omar for today's selection of music, German and French music.
Yes, we really appreciate his effort. So we go to the question of today and every day in the German and French relation, because it didn't change. I mean, Europe is becoming one union, one state, and one country, yet the relation between Germany and France, the most heavily populated two countries, and the strongest as regards economy and everything, and armies and everything, there is a special relationship. The Franco-German friendship, which started in 1963 onwards with the Élysée Treaty, has seen agreements of joint cooperation in foreign policy, economic and military integration, and exchange of citizen education. How was that treaty effective in these fields, Excellency?
You're right. Let us just measure what has been done since this famous Élysée Treaty, which founded the bedrock of what we have in common between France and Germany. I will tell you just one thing. For us, working with Germany is a reflex, and here even, and I think probably we'll discuss that. The reflex is to speak and to work on a daily basis with the Germans. And you take every segment of our public, social, economic, political life. The reflex is to work with the Germans. We are the two major, powers, countries in Europe, population-wise, economic-wise. In every field, you will find France and Germany together. So it's nothing. It's no longer something which is top down. I would say, coming from the top, and an instruction given to work with the Germans. This is now a reflex. On the daily life, business, we work with the Germans. This is something which is completely part of our DNA. We don't even have to ask the question. This is something which comes very naturally. And here in Egypt, working with the Germans is something we do absolutely on a permanent basis. So imagine the change compared to what was the situation even
70 years ago.
70 years ago, of course.
So, speaking about this relation, Excellency, what do you think about that?
It's if I may refer as well to the Élysée Treaty, it's something which has been conceived and thought by two great statesmen. But then it has really, because it was devised in that way, really spread into the population. It started, of course, with the government integration, and my colleague already mentioned the reflex, the German-French reflex, which we have, and which proves. For me, for example, if I come to a new post as ambassador, my first visit will be to the French colleague.
The same for me.
The same for you. And the same applies for our president, for our prime minister, for our foreign minister, for other ministers. If you start new on a post, first you visit your homologue, your counterpart in France, in Paris, to really get their ideas, to exchange, and to know that on many occasions following, you will need this cooperation.
And cooperation.
Because it plays a big role bilaterally, but it plays as well a big role as a motor of Europe.
So I think the period from 1945 to 1963 was just the preliminary part for this integration to start in 1963, right?
I think it started already, and again in the population, in the civil society, you saw it already. I felt it myself. I grew up in the German province, and I felt that my parents were very French-minded. My father liked the wonderful French wines. He only bought French cars.
Really?
I still remember when the first DS came out. It was a sensation in a small place where we lived, and he loved always the French cars. And
the Deux Chevaux, huh?
No, it was not the Deux Chevaux, it was the Citroën.
Oh,
the Citroën DS and so on. He really loved these cars. And my parents then, they bought early and constructed early, bought first and then constructed even houses in France, in the Alsace and in the Vosges. And that's the way we learned about France as a very close partner and as a very European partner. and someone we stay close with.
So, Excellency,
This really is inherited throughout the generation. My son, my elder son, he made his bachelor's degrees on the Lycée Français in Berlin.
Mhm.
And later on he studied in the Collège des Ingénieurs to make his MBA. After he made his engineering, he made an MBA in a trilateral program with the Collège des Ingénieurs in Torino, in Italy, and in Germany. So to give a little bit of the European perspective.
So, Excellency Georg, you think that your personal experience relating to the German and French cooperation, could you tell us about that?
I have many, really, throughout my career, I have many
I mean, part of your
examples.
career, for example, was helping the environment and acting as an ambassador at large for environment protection, which is a very critical problem. And something like that, definitely you had a lot of encounter with your
I had
colleagues.
many encounters. I was invited to the French Ambassadors Conference to speak about my experiences. So I was invited by the French Foreign Minister to come there, and he sat beside me, and we discussed about environmental issues.
Because you have the same
Later on, I
footstep.
went with my French counterpart. We went to the White House to talk to an advisor of President Bush at that time about questions of environment, because the Americans developed different issues on some aspects. It was as well about biopolitical issues, stem cell research, and so on. It was very interesting to do it together. The two of us really went together.
Having the same foot post, as you can use the expression, right?
We left the same footprint to really convince them that two major partners in Europe had a view which was not totally aligned with the American view. But I think it was left some impression that France and Germany together presented their case.
So, Excellency Ambassador Stefan, what's your personal experience leading to the German-French cooperation? I think you have had a lot.
Yeah, I just want to mention one thing, because when Adenauer and de Gaulle decided that the time of peace was now coming, and they had to turn the page of a so bloody history between the two countries, they took probably the brightest decision. They decided to create an agency, a French-German agency in charge of exchange of youth. And started now, from the early 60s, and still now, every year you have hundreds of thousands of young French spending a bit of their time in Germany, and on the reverse, German pupils, students coming to France. And I had the chance, to take profit of this program. I was, probably 13 or 14 years old.
This was 10 years ago, right?
Yeah, you're a flattering man, And so we went to Munich with my class, and we were accommodated by a class, the German school, and we spent one full week together, having same lessons, same class teaching, and that was my first discovery of Germany. And it is very important to get acquainted to each other, to know each other. And I think this is something we have to be very cautious about. My generation is completely accustomed to work with our German friends. We have to make sure that the coming generations will still have this mood, what I call the reflex. And I think this is very important. These youth exchange programs still continue. We don't have to take for granted, that things will continue very, very smoothly.
Racism can really happen in just on the next
And
corner of the street.
This is why connecting the two societies, better understanding each other, traveling from one country to another one, exchanging all the time, just to know what is the mindset of the Germans, or for the Germans, what is the mindset of the French. This is absolutely crucial. And so we have to make sure that this kind of programs of exchange will continue, even if the years are passing, even if the memories of the wars are also passing.
I remember that I was in Berlin last October, and I think it was last September, yes. And I saw the students, the French students, coming to Berlin, and they were young students. I mean, they were early teens, and they were going to around Berlin, and this is really something to be admired.
And if I can add one thing, also learning the language of the other.
Yes.
And we are a bit worried by the fact that German language is decreasing in the French education system, and in Germany also the French language is decreasing. So we have to take this very seriously to make sure that the new generations will, understand each other even by speaking their
I was going to ask you this question, both of you, because once His Royal Highness Prince Charles said, "Bad English is spoken all over the world."
Well, as you can testify today, as far as I'm concerned.
No, I mean I'm just saying that because I really find it not here, but in everywhere you can go around in the world and you can find this broken English. So how can we fight this? I mean, to learn German and to learn French instead of learning the international English. How can you really design that? Because this is quite difficult. Because people are, of course, I only speak English and Arabic. I'm bilingual, unfortunately, and very bad in French. So when people are starting to use English in France or in Germany, why can't the other vice versa happens? If you can start to speak German in France, and why didn't you promote this language to break the language barrier? Was it possible, or are there any policies to do that?
I think we do a lot, and there are programs, particularly right now with a very strong accent in the border regions, because by the French-German
integration, yes,
we have a lot of trans-border traffic. People working in one country, living in the other.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
And they have to speak German, or they have to speak French. Depending on where they work.
So you find more increasing
and
the level?
There are really programs where people find out, and when I was in Strasbourg I could really notice it, how eager young French people on the Alsatian side were to learn German, because they knew their career and their work would depend on finding a job on the other side,
the borders, yes,
and speaking very good German. And I think this was a very strong incentive, which maybe you don't have immediately if you are more in the inner parts of the countries, if you're in Berlin, or if, let's say, in Hamburg or in Lyon. It's a little bit different because you don't have this very practical approach. But there we need as well the political example of our leaders, and the example of the parents.
I know that de Gaulle spoke very fluent German, because he stayed in the prisoner of war camp for some time, and he took the time to read German literature, and he was a very good German speaker.
And to be honest, I met many more French who spoken excellent German than I noticed or perceived German speaking a very good French. So it was a very good language education, even
I think this helped very much, this magnificent character, to help more with the integration, like what President de Gaulle.
Because knowing the language is also knowing the culture and the people, and
you become emotionally involved with the language that you're talking about, and definitely it gives more integration. You start thinking using this language.
What is
you cannot have animosity with the language that you're talking with.
What is at stake between France and Germany after now 70 years of complete reconciliation? This is not to let the Franco-German relations only to politicians.
Yes.
But
I do totally agree with
it has to be, something which matters for people, for French people and for German people. So how to connect the societies?
Yes.
This is the key, because between our leaders, it will always continue to be, perfect,
it's
right.
Yes.
But it has to percolate in a way to the people, to the population. And this is not only an issue of transboundary connection. Of course, it's absolutely key, but it has to concern all the population. All the French people have to be aware that Germany is our key partner, and so to be a key partner, you have to understand how they behave, what is their culture, how do they speak, how do they work exactly. So you know, exchange of young students, programs between the two youth, of course economic integration, leaders together in every field of the daily life, you know, connecting the two societies. This
So
is the
can
key.
diplomacy bring that practicality? Practically, I mean, you as a diplomat or a representative of France here in Cairo, or a representative of France anywhere in the world, how can diplomacy help in bringing the people? Both of you, I mean, I'm talking to both of your excellencies.
I mean, the Elysee Treaty showed it, because it, of course, had a start with the governmental and the official structures, but it went on by the youth office, the Franco-German youth office, to connect as well civil society. And this is really important, the most important thing, that civil society is looking at each other, is understanding each other, is taking itself back with its own maybe prejudices sometimes, with its own mindset, and to try to understand the other, to appreciate the other, to see the culture of the other, and that's a way, I think, to the fabric of society, two societies intermingle and connect with each other. And the same was done with the business, with the economy. I think it was a genial approach of Schuman, the foreign minister of France, to propose the cooperation on, for example, mining.
In the steel industry, of course.
After
Yes.
the
In the
economy,
Alsace and Lorraine, to make both factories on both
not
sides.
only Alsace-Lorraine, it was all over Germany, working together, and it really connected the two economies in a way which somehow made it very difficult to have conflicts
To
like we had
disintegrate,
before.
yes. This
To
is,
disintegrate.
I find that very
And
interesting.
it was a genial
Yes.
plan and concept.
To make the both factories, or the two factories or different factories, completely integrated, and they cannot function without depending on the other. I think this was an
And two
act of
economies
geniality.
at the
yes,
same time,
yes.
huh?
This is an act of geniality, definitely. So after the break, we have to touch the political and military, because we have something to discuss with our listeners, and that's the cultural cooperation. So we'll touch the military and politics after the break.
Yes, and back again. This is Word of Info, and you can call us at 257-89407. And today we're having with us His Excellency Ambassador Stéphane Romete, Ambassador of France in Egypt, and Ambassador Julius Loy, Ambassador of Germany in Egypt. So back again, Word of Info.
So, talking about the political and military alliance, I find it very interesting that the German and French, as early after the World War II, decided to make mixed units, where, for example, the tanks come from Germany and the tank units are from Germany, the infantry could be from France, and it is fully integrated. It started all with one battalion, now it's approaching a division of complete integrated German and French officers and soldiers. And there is also political arrangements so that, as you were kind enough to tell us, that whenever you come to a country, you're always the first contact is with your counterpart. So this does not go only for ambassadors or diplomats, but it goes also for other political jobs. So tell us about this integration.
Well, first I have to correct one thing, Amra. Our two military apparatus are not completely and fully integrated. We have made a lot of progresses, but there are some common units, there are some common headquarters.
Especially on the borders, the units
Absolutely.
are common units.
But,
That's what I understand.
And we have still some progresses to make together. And there is a roadmap between France and Germany to go even further, in terms of military cooperation. And we certainly have to do more. But the point which is important is that, on most of the state of the world, crisis, global issues, France and Germany, we completely agree. You couldn't find, of course, on certain issues we can have nuances. But you can't find today an issue, a crisis, especially in this region, the Middle East, on which France and Germany are not completely, aligned in their positioning and do not act together. And I think this is the global perspective. So when you agree on everything, then you can act together. What is important is the fact that on most of the diplomatic issues, I would say even 100% of them, France and Germany always coordinate, always find common approach, and always take common initiatives. And then after in terms of implementation, through assistance, through cooperation, if needed through security or military might, then we can act together. But the bottom of the what we are doing together, this is the fact that we agree on the state of the world affairs.
Of course. And Your Excellency, Bob?
Well, I had this experience myself. I was in Strasbourg, and of course I visited this integrated brigade, which we have in close to Strasbourg and close to Freiburg, Milan. And I saw really the reality of integration of this German-French brigade in Actu, and it was very much already very common to work together, to understand each other, to learn the language of the other. And I think it was a very good example of how soldiers can deal with each other. And we have used this brigade as well, for example, in Mali, for a mission which brought France and Germany militarily as well together.
That's very interesting, because what remains after, of course, the political, military alliance and economic alliance, which definitely has its effect on the people, on the common people of both sides, is definitely the cultural alliance, because music, culture, education and literature is the thing that brings people together. If people can share the same book, the same novel, then, or the same song or the same music, they become fans of the same thing, and therefore definitely they will never ever hate each other because they love the same thing, even if it's a football team. So how can culture alliance help to bring these two countries together, or these people together?
Can be mixed orchestras,
Yes.
which we have, because you addressed questions of music and French music from Couperin to Ravel, Debussy.
Yes.
Berlioz, of course, is something which is very common in Germany.
Yes.
And on the other side, I think Bach, the Matthews, St. Matthew's
The famous
Passion,
three
is very
Bs.
much heard as well, heard
Yes.
as well in France. So I see a lot of commonalities over there, but as well literature, question of philosophy, questions of painting, which is something which doesn't need immediately language as well. I think this all can bring artists, but audience as well, together and get a few into the mindset of the partner.
Definitely. And what do you think of that, sir?
Well, I just have a personal experience. I'm very much inspired by German culture in so many fields. Would I have to be expelled and finish my life in an isolated island somewhere in the middle of the Pacific? I will bring.
We can make it in the Mediterranean.
I will bring Bach, certainly, because I think Bach is the.
He's the father of the music, he's the classical music, definitely.
Is the
Godfather.
I think he sums up all the music only by his name, So I will bring all Bach compositions, especially the cello suites, which are my favorite, and I will take Thomas Mann, the Magical Mountain, which I think is one of the most beautiful piece of world literature. I will take a bit of German philosophy. I will bring a bit of Habermas with me, and Habermas today is probably the most inspiring philosopher in the world. And so I think German culture has an influence on the world which is absolutely massive, and so we need to better also understand and take from the German culture.
Definitely. I mean, we have to talk a lot about that. We have to have you again in our program. You have to promise us to come again, please, because we wanted to touch maybe in 2 minutes or so the Egyptian or the trilateral relations between our countries. Egypt, Germany and France definitely have a lot of things in common. we have strong bonding. And if we talk about culture, we definitely have to give a mention about the influence that the French had in hieroglyphics, and the Germans, the great efforts that they continued and they built on the work of Champollion. When we see how the German scientists or Egyptologists were able to decipher a lot of hieroglyphics based on what they've learned from Champollion and how they affected humanity, we understand now that this is not a myth, this is not theology, this is Egypt and this is the world and this is the Egyptian culture. We have to talk about this trilateral relation. We only have cultural alliance, we have a lot of economic alliance. How the three countries can work together in coordination? Maybe I think it will have to be a very short question, but we're running out of time. But just give us a mention, sir.
Well, I think both countries, we are really working with Egypt together for quite a long time.
Yes, definitely.
We have long-standing relations in the cultural sector. The first German school was founded here 1873, the school in Doki. The other schools not much later. We have the Archaeological Institute here from 1907 on already, and I think we have a very good bilateral cooperation in all these issues. School, archaeology, where we have an enormous French presence, starting with Champollion, but it continued after.
Maspero, I mean,
It's a big, it's a really a big enterprise, and this shows that we care very much about Egypt. I learned already about Egypt, of course, mainly the pyramids and mainly the pharaohs, but not only when I was a young child in the primary. It started quite early, and today we are really working on our relation with Egypt and really being at the side of Egypt in looking at in the quest for its stability. And stability is a very broad concept. It's of course security, but it's as well stabilizing civil society, stabilizing the economy, the economic relations, and really using whatever we have as an advantage in our national economy, using it in the bilateral or the trilateral relations.
Because I believe that what binds us is not just the Mediterranean, what binds us is the same environment we're living in, the same culture we're living in. Egypt is part of, if not by geography, part of Europe, but it's definitely a part of Europe historically and culturally. The relations that goes down to hundreds of years, not just from Napoleon Bonaparte time or from the start of the relations during Bismarck time, but definitely it was a lot. What do you think of that, sir?
Well, I think Egypt is more and more looking, I would say, northward. Of course, France has a major interest in the Mediterranean Sea. Germany also is looking much more and more southward. And so we are at the meeting point between Egypt, France and Germany, somewhere in the middle of this Mediterranean Sea.
Of course.
And we have, so much at stake together, stabilizing this region, working together against terrorism, fighting political Islam, treating the issue of migrations, what Georg said in terms of solid, a strong stability of Egypt, which is absolutely key for our two countries. So we have here France and Germany very, very common interests.
Definitely. Excellencies, it was a great pleasure and a great honor to share your experience and expertise in a short hour. Promises to come back again to our program. We definitely
Anytime, Amra.
Thank you, really. We really enjoyed it very much too, and I think our listeners had a very good food for thought about how countries can build up, change animosity into fraternity, and this is quite difficult, and it's an achievement done only by civilized people. And I think.
Yes. And by this we come to the end of World of Info. Thank you very much for coming. His Excellency Ambassador Stéphane Ramotey, Ambassador of France in Egypt, and His Excellency Ambassador Julius Loy, Ambassador of Germany in Egypt. With us was Dr. Amr Mabrouk, Professor of Plastic Surgery at Ain Shams University. Da'a Muhammad was at the controls. I'm Najla NAGIB. See you next Thursday, same time, same station, FM 95.4.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.